I choose. Wilt thou suffer me to sit in grief? My heart is as a pen in your hand. Thou art the cause if I am glad or melancholy. Save what thou willest, what will have I? Save what thou showest, what do I see? You alone of all the worlds I choose. Wilt thou suffer me to sit in grief in that vessel where thou givest color to the soul? Who am I? What is my love and what my hate? If thou keepst me this, I am only this. If thou wouldst have me that I am. When thou art hidden, I am of the infidels. When thou art manifest, I am of the faithful. For I have nothing, but thou hast bestowed it. What is it, Lord, that thou dost seek from me? What is it, Lord, that thou dost seek from me? For of all the world I choose thee alone. So it's been almost a month since we've been together for this anyway. We're on the second letter? Is that right? We're on the second letter. Very good. So just to catch everyone up, we're studying or reading the book, The Practice of the Presence of God, written by a medieval monk, Brother Lawrence, who did not have a very high opinion of himself, worked in the kitchen in a monastery. He joined the monastery in order to straighten himself out. He thought that he was not a very clever man and that he really wasn't able to learn the Latin and the Hebrew and the whatnots that they were teaching in the monastery. And so he decided that he better pick a practice that he thought was more akin to what he was able to do. So he took it upon himself to never, ever forget the presence of the beloved, the presence of God. And so by any means necessary, he spent about 15 years practicing, never forgetting God for even a split second during his day. And we've been reading about how he did that, basically by repeating the name of God over and over. Also by, when he went to work, he would lay everything out that was necessary for the day, and he would offer it in prayer before he started. And then as he did each thing, he said, I offered it in its moment, forgot it, and moved on to the next thing. And at the end of the day, I considered what I had done, and I thought to myself, have I done it well? If I did it well, I thanked God for his grace and for his presence. And if I determined I hadn't done it well, I apologized. I did not let it disturb my mind, and I returned to thinking of God with the promise of doing better. So that was his general technique, and he saw God because of it, became a saint, recognized by his peers as a knower of God. So it's not difficult in the sense that it's not what you need to know in order to enjoy a fulfilling life with the beloved, with true love, with unconditioned love growing in your heart at all times. It's a matter of mindfulness and paying attention. Actually, all the paths, all the four paths really come down to that. The bhakti yoga, the path of devotion, is just falling in love with God, like Brother Lawrence, never forgetting the presence of divine love in our heart and in our day. And then Jnana Yoga really is just the attention, paying attention to how your mind works, how you work, how this world works, watching it closely and seeing what the fruit of every action is, and then just determining those things that are changing and temporary, let go of them. Be in a constant quest for that which is unchanging in yourself. Raja Yoga also is just a lot of discipline for the mind, so that you can slow the thoughts down to the extent that when one thought ends before that next thought begins, that inter-thoughtful space, God can be seen, they say. And so it's with the path of mind control. And then, of course, Karma Yoga is exactly what Brother Lawrence was talking about when he went to work. That is staying present in the moment, not getting caught up in history, not getting caught up in future, but being fully present in the moment, and to do things not for their cycle of cause and effect, not for the role that they play within history and future, but in the role that they play in their isness in the moment, where they have no purpose. They actually have nothing to accomplish, because in the moment there is no change. And so as you work in the moment without paying attention to fruit of your actions, everything that you do is offered in real time to your beloved. So you do it with the greatest care and with the sweetest attention, with the best wishes, positive thinking, happiness in your heart. You do the task, you set it free, and you don't ever think about it again. So that's Brother Lawrence and his method as we're going to look at it through the Vedantic lens. He was a Christian monk, so we're really going into the mysticism, the mystics, to really see the sameness of religion, the sameness of what needs to be accomplished. So we're on the second letter, And this one was written to a reverend, and he doesn't give his name. He says, as he writes, "Not finding my manner of life in books, although I have no difficulty about it, yet, for greater security, I shall be glad to know your thoughts concerning it." So he really feels like he had busted out on his own path here, which is a beautiful thing. That's one of my favorite beginnings to a contemplation time, is to imagine the world before there were churches and mosques and temples and books and teachers and incarnations, to go back to a time where it was just you and your life and the thought of God, if you had it at the moment. When the rishis, those 7 mythic rishis, wandered off into the Himalayas to find out the nature of living, what is the point of life, what is all of this? And so very much like Brother Lawrence here, they had to work out their own tools, as it were. Interestingly enough, Jesus has a quote like that: "Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling." With a great deal of respect and a great deal of reverence, face the world and learn from it. Open your heart to being a student, and see the divine as it betrays itself to you, as it gives you hints and little little trinkets along the way. All right, so not finding any manner in the books, he wanted to write to the Reverend and say, "This is what I'm doing. What do you think?" Which is a good way to do it. Look for someone, the same way you find your guru. Look for someone that you respect. Look for someone whom you think has touched something at a higher level than yourself, someone you think is a person of integrity, a person of love, a person of freedom, and then go and ask them what they think. So he says, "I'm glad to know your thoughts concerning it. In a conversation some days since with a person of piety, he told me the spiritual life was a life of grace, which begins with servile fear, which is increased by hope of eternal life, and which is consummated by pure love." What a beautiful progression. That's exactly what Swamiji says. Swamiji says that religion begins in fear, but ends in love. That fear happens the first time that we decided we existed separate and apart from everything else. The first time we had a thought that we were different from the whole, the first thing born is fear, because we don't know the nature of the other. We don't know what the rest of the world is. If I'm me, what's the rest of the world? And so in fear and trembling, we work out our salvation. We try and figure out what's going on. What is this infinity that I seem to be dumped into the middle of? And so he gives us that progression that, he says the spiritual life is a life of grace. That is so very important, to have that idea that the world, that God, that everything else that you don't call yourself is benevolent. Now, why would it be? It would be because you have that ideal stamped within yourself, and you're not separate from the world. This, we'll just leave it at that, this produced you. You are of the nature of this, whatever this is, whatever is behind this. And so if you look and watch closely at the things that are inherent to yourself, to your own nature, you come to know, through a reverse osmosis sort of thing, the nature of that which has established you, has given you your existence. And so we know that the 3 things that the sages have found is that one thing we seem to know about without being taught about it is love. We know love when we see it, we know love when we practice it, and it comes natural to us, even if we haven't ever heard of it before. The second thing that they noticed was that we have an intelligence, that as these experiences get slapped up against this wall of senses, we're able to make sense of it. We're able to build a world in our mind. We're able to suss out truth. We're able to recognize truth in that. So they said that we were intelligent by nature. And then, of course, existence. We exist. I am. that you can't even begin to define. What does that mean, to exist? And so they said that those must be the qualities of this unmanifested, unchanging absolute from which this world is manifested, from which this world appears. Not separate, but able to be distinguished from that. So he says we begin this life with servile fear, which is increased by hope of eternal life, and which is consummated by pure love. And so this is the final discovery, this pure love, this unconditioned love, that this world is out for your good always. It might not be out for the body's good necessarily. There are things here that can hurt the body. It might not be out for the mind's good at times, but it will always be out for the soul's well-being. So everything that we encounter is a help. Everything that we encounter in a day is a part of Scripture, if we see the world properly, if we can remove that sense of ego, that sense of self-serving, and see things from a mostly objective perspective without all those internal machinations of mind, we come to that knowledge, and we're led there by this hope of eternal life, of not having to die, with it couched in that fear, that respect for the endeavor, but to know that it ends in pure love, that each of these states has its different stages by which one arrives at last, at this blessed consummation, this blessed oneness. You know, Christians quite often talk about this merging with God as marriage. And they see that the two become one, and that one happens in that consummation, that act of marriage. And so we are betrothed. We live our life as though betrothed. We promise ourselves to the divine. We give ourselves and our future and our sense of being, our name perhaps, to the Lord. And then through our practice, through our dismantling of our separateness, of our egoism, by dismantling that, we come to that consummation. We realize the oneness, and that marriage is now no longer a betrothal, but a marriage, a manifested marriage of oneness. I have not followed all of these methods, he says. On the contrary, from I know not when, what instincts, I found they discouraged me. This was the reason why, at my entrance into religion, I took a resolution to give myself up to God as the best return I could make for his love, and for the love of him, to renounce everything beside. So this is a beautiful way to start. He said that there were lots of methods that he couldn't get, that he found discouraging, that he couldn't quite make it through. He wasn't smart enough for them, didn't have enough discipline for them, didn't have enough courage to undertake them maybe. And so he says that when I began my religion, I just took the resolution just to give myself up to God, the good and the bad. I'm not going to worry. I'm not going to just give him the things I'm able to do. I'm giving him the mistakes as well. I'm giving him the things that I'm incapable of. I'm going to give my whole self, the broken parts, the not working parts, the ignorant parts, and the parts of knowledge as well. So I took a resolution to give myself up to God. So what is God in this context? God is that love, right? Satchitananda. So you're giving yourself up to pure love. That means you're no longer willing to live from the ego self, from the mind self, but that you're willing to work from the heart self. You're willing to do what is necessary to live a pure and encouraging and helpful life. A life that will be your quest for the divine, but a life that will be a benefit to humanity. So you give up your own sense of self in order to serve, one, the beloved, and two, the manifestation, the rest of the world. So he made those commitments here. I took the resolution to give myself up to God as the best return I could make for his love, and for the love of him, to renounce everything beside. So you see, it continued on as that love grew. This renunciation, it comes from knowing there's nothing better than that divinity which dwells within. It comes from the understanding of watching life, to recognize that when people come into this world, they come in empty-handed, and to watch that regardless of how hard they work and what they accomplish, they leave in the same way. So taking a very straightforward clue like that, you use your intelligence and you say, there's nothing to be had here. There's nothing that can be added to your soul. There's nothing that can be taken from your soul. And so you give up looking for things, collecting things, stacking things, building things. You give that up for the sake of love. You renounce everything that does not encourage that love within. Yeah.
At the end, okay.
No, sure, that's fine. Fine.
It's interesting, according to him, renouncing others was easy path for him. I mean, renouncing everything else for that pure love and thought. But for most of us, at least for me, that seems to be the problem why we take up everything else, because what's supposed to be the most important thing is not so easy for most of us. But he says, I'm not fit for all those things, but I can do this.
Right.
It seems very interesting that it's easy for him, but that seems to be the hardest for most people to.
No, it's true. It's true. He does admit, or he has admitted in some of his other passages, that it was hard. It took him 15 years to actually master the practice. But you're right. But I think that it's hard for us because we haven't given ourselves over to that love to begin with. And we haven't been paying attention to the things that are happening in the world. We're paying attention to the news and paying attention to our paychecks and our vacations and our advances within our context, The problem is that when we look at everything, we only look at a section of it. Everything is one. If you look at cause and effect, there's no place that you can go and say this is a cause, because every cause is the effect of the next cause. It's like it's circular. So you can't divide where cause and effect actually has its boundaries, if it even has it. And Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, he says there is no such thing as cause and effect. He says what you call to cause and effect is merely repetition. You just do things again and again and you come up with the principle. And why would there be no cause and effect? Because there is nothing but the present moment. The past exists in mind, future also is a concept. And so he's just thrown himself in and begun to pay attention. Renunciation, when it's done through discrimination, through discernment, is much easier. I remember one time, this is one of those funny stories I tell, but I was in Kolpara in India, and I was just a brahmachari. I mean, just a brahmachari. You could still see the folding creases in my dhoti. It's like I was brand new. And I was visiting Kolpara, which is a little village center, and I was talking with the Swami, and this very old man comes up to the Swami, and I can't understand what they're saying. They're speaking in the local language there. But I noticed the man looking at me and pointing like this a couple of times. And so he's standing there, and the Swami then says something to him. And whatever the Swami said to him, the man broke into tears, fell onto the ground, and just sat there, laid there, holding my feet. Now, I can't tell you how that felt. One, because I had never, obviously, had anybody do such a thing to me. Two, I had no idea what was going on. I wasn't at all familiar with that custom. And so the Swami had to help the man stand up, actually make the man stand up, and encouraged him and sent him on his way. And I was like, Maharaj, what was that? What happened there? And he said, well, the man saw you as a white man, and you were dressed in these clothes, and he wondered, what are you doing? Who are you? Why are you dressed in the clothes of a brahmachari as a Westerner? And I told him that you were a brahmachari of the order. And he began crying and said to me, he says, my whole life I have lived with nothing, a poor man in total abject poverty, and I have not been able to renounce a single thing. And here's this young boy in his late 20s who has come from the land of in his mind, the land of wealth and riches, and has been able to renounce. And I was quite disturbed by that thought, because the piety that I saw in that man, the humility I saw in that man was the biggest lesson I could have gotten. And that night I had a dream as I fell asleep thinking about this. And I learned that his tears were beautiful, but his idea was wrong. Because you see, in my dream, there was this vast beach, and there was an infinite amount of sand on this beach, and there were also thousands of people, and all the people were trying to collect their sand into a pile. And some people were running to piles and stealing sand to add to their piles and causing strife and a fight. And some people were just doing it as fast as they could and were joining together with other people just to get these giant piles of sand. And in this dream, I'm sitting there watching everybody fighting over sand. And so I reached down and I took a spoonful of sand. And whoever was narrating my dream said, "Take a spoonful." So I took a spoonful, and it was just sand, and I spat it out. I was like, "What is this?" And he said, the voice didn't say anything, just left me with that knowledge, and I understood. If you realize that 1 tablespoon of sand can't feed you, can't give you anything that you need, is it more renunciation to renounce a whole beach than it is to renounce a spoonful? Is there really a difference in quantity of things that are useless to you as a divine self? So in this world, it's not a matter of renouncing big and huge things. It's simply letting go of things that don't serve you properly, don't give you anything. That's why Thakur says the most important key to renunciation is to know that everything expires, to know that everything goes away, and that more than 90% of your suffering will cease with that realization alone. When someone dies, it won't surprise you. When the car breaks down, it won't bother you. When the house burns down, oh, this was the expiration date. Like in the words of Holy Mother, oh, this is how these things die. So it's living life without that expectation, knowing that you cannot become secure here. One of my favorite ways of telling myself that, when I find myself looking around for things of the senses, I remind myself, I say, "Brother, you know that every blanket here is 6 inches too short. You know that. You've tried every one of them. There is no blanket here that's going to comfortably keep you. So keep your eyes on the Lord." So that's a long way around to an answer to your question there. Yes, it seems difficult. It seems difficult only on this side of the action. When you get to the other side, you're amazed at how that had nothing to do with you. I remember my first night in the monastery. I was terrified to let go of everything, cutting up my credit cards, turning in my phone, one by one, just getting rid of all that stuff. It was terrifying for me. It was like, oh my God, what am I doing? What am I doing? And when I woke up after my first morning in the monastery, I was amazed that I felt no different about myself than I ever had. It was as if I had done nothing. It was only a big deal going through the process. Once the process was finished, I realized I am who I am, and all that stuff had nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it at all. So renounce. Don't be afraid. It doesn't mean you have to get rid of it, but certainly recognize that, like the Bhagavad Gita says, the soul cannot be wedded, cannot be burned. That's its way of saying, this world has no effect on you as a self, as a person, as a spirit. Nothing's going to be added to you. Nothing's going to be taken away from you. Both of those are true. Nothing will be added, so don't go grabbing. Nothing can be taken, so don't fear renunciation. The fact is, nobody leaves this world without renunciation. You can renounce one of two ways. You can either do it yourself, or you can just have the world take it from your crumbling hands as you die. Nobody's taking anything with them. So do it on your own terms. Do it for the sake of love. Do it as your offering to the beloved for the well-being of the world. Take what you have and give it freely. And there's a scripture in the New Testament that says, give out in great measure, for the measure by which you give, by that measure you will receive. So you'll find that that's the case. For the first year, I commonly employed myself during the time set apart for devotion with the thought of death and judgment, heaven, hell, and my sins, and thus continued for some years, applying my mind carefully the rest of the day, and even in the midst of my business, to the presence of God, whom I considered always as with me, and often as in me. So this is interesting that when he first began, of course, he began as a Christian, so that's going to heavily influence what he thought about, but he thought of death. Vivekananda says the thought of death, there's no greater teacher, according to Yama in the Katha Upanishad. There's no greater teacher than death. And in many old paintings, medieval paintings, if they paint monks or if they have an artist in his room, there's often a skull sitting on the desk somewhere. And it's not that everybody had human skulls sitting on their desk. That was because that was a prominent method of knowing the nature of life. Keep the thought of death before you all the time. That will teach you what's valuable. So he says, I employed my time during the times set apart for devotion. So during the morning arati and the evening arati and the noon meditations, that he would sit there and think about death, think about judgment, think about his ability to love, thinking about, have I indulged in the senses? Have I gone for things that can't feed me? Am I clutching onto sand or not? And the thought of death, judgment, heaven, that reward, and hell, and my sins. Thus continued some years, applying my mind carefully the rest of the day, and even in the midst of my business, to the presence of God, who I considered as always with me and often as in me. So you see his process of growing there. Initially, God was only external. But as that relationship grows, as it sweetens, as your discernment ripens, you begin to get little bits of understanding. It's like, where do I begin and where does the Lord end? I had a conversation with a good friend one time, and he was telling me that he liked Vedanta, but he couldn't buy this idea of God being, everything being God. He's like, how is that, what's that word when you see God and when you see everything as God? There's a word for it. Pantheism. And he says, my church doesn't believe in pantheism. Yeah, because God isn't things. God can't be things. And I mentioned to him, I said, well, I thought you said God was omnipotent, omnipresent. It's like if he's omnipresent, where in this thing does God end and the thing begin? And if I am not God, where does God end and where do I begin? This whole idea. But he was right in the sense that God is not just everything. You have to add those two words to make it true. God is everything and more. So it goes from pantheism, which just means God is this universe, to panentheism, which means that God is this entire universe and more and beyond. There is no limit. There is no line to be drawn. So he sees this, and he's growing in that understanding that first, yes, God is with me, but quite often you get that sense that the beloved is within as well. At length, I came insensibly to do the same thing during my set time of prayer, which caused in me great delight and consolation. This is a beautiful thing here. You know, in our spiritual life, our practice should be a great delight. If it's not a great delight, pause it for a minute and start thinking, why is this not a great delight? I'm thinking about a God of infinite grace. I'm thinking about a life of infinite mercy, of an unconditioned love, of an immortality. How can I not be delighting in this moment? How can I not be finding encouragement in this moment? You see, so if you're sitting there slogging through your name of God, trying to get your time over with so that you get your 4 million repetitions out of the way so that you can go watch Tom and Jerry on the television, your life, your spiritual life's not going to be a delight to you. It's not going to be a delight. If you sit there thinking about your faults and how unworthy you are, and oh my gosh, did God see that? And oh, look, my mind is so out of control. If you just sit there in your practice enumerating your faults, your practice, your time with the beloved, is not going to be a delight to you. If you're sitting there doing your practice thinking, I'm going to get myself to heaven, I'm going to get my realization, I'm going to, to progress in spiritual life, so you're looking for some promised thing in an imagined future, your spiritual life is not going to be a delight to you. We find in what he said earlier, the secret to finding it, that we know that spiritual life is a life of grace. And so what do you think about as you're repeating that name of God? You think about the spiritual life. It's a life of grace. There's no room for a list of my faults. God is not interested in the list of faults or accomplishments. There is only pure love. That's what I'm growing in. That's what I'm thinking of. And that knowledge of what does it mean to have a love without conditions. We've never seen such a thing in this world. So contemplating this idea expands the mind, expands the heart. And that's where you find the delight in your practice, in your religion, which caused me great delight and consolation. That consolation grows as the awareness of God grows. I found in my life that the first, unfortunately, almost the first decade, was really trying to believe that God existed and that all of this was, and that the things that the scriptures were saying were there. And I would sit there and I would try and do my mantra, and there was a lot of slogging in the early years, Oh my God, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And I found there came a point, by the grace of the beloved, that at some point, that little space that you've managed to eke out at the beginning for God to put his toe into, for the Divine Mother to get her shoe through the door, that eventually that becomes the divine, that becomes the presence, and that ever expands in your spiritual life as you go on, that sense of the enormity of God, the consuming nature of the thought of love, of the thought of infinity, of the thought of immortality, at the thought of grace, at the knowledge of mercy, of the letting go of all of your fear, the letting go of all of your incriminating self, letting go of all of that need to perform, that need to be, that need to accomplish, letting go of all of it and moving fully and comfortably into the present and recognizing it as divine, recognizing its nature to be spirit, not material. And with that comes this beautiful sense of consolation, that comfort, that holding of God, because you know from the idea of your own existence that God can never leave, has never left, will never leave. And you start seeing these markers, the increase of love in your life, the increase of patience in your life, the increase of contentment, the increase of profundity and meaning in your life, and how it seems to fill even the smallest interstices of those things that used to be just pure drudgery, can now at least be humorous as we go along. This practice produced in me so high an esteem for God. Yes, as you contemplate the nature of that divine love, when you contemplate the limitless nature of what it means to have love with no condition. And that's just naturally going to grow this esteem for God, that faith alone was capable to satisfy me in that point. So you see that faith, that faith, what is faith? Faith, it isn't this just believing in something with no reason. Faith is listening to the intuitive prompting of something that you know but can't demonstrate yet. You know, it's something that you know that there's immortality. Why do you know that there's immortality? Because you know the word. And you say, well, it's just a word. It's a word for something that doesn't exist. Why would we have a word for something that doesn't exist? Where would we have found the idea of immortality if it doesn't exist in the world of the senses or the mind? Where did you get that? Through contemplation, you understand you brought that with you. You brought the idea of immortality with you. Same thing with the idea of infinity. What's that word? Where does that come from? How do we know of infinity when there is no infinity? Everything has a boundary. We know it because we bring it with us. You see, faith is a following those inner promptings. It's listening to those that inner sense. There is more than what I see. You know, this nature of love. You know, the fact that we can easily see that it's part and parcel of us. How did we know it? How do we find it? Beauty. That's my favorite one. How do you know something is beautiful? Who told you that was beautiful? You know, beauty, we recognize it when we see it. Why? Because our nature is beauty. Our nature is beautiful. So faith is paying attention to those things, not dismantling them, not pushing them out.
So if our nature is beautiful, then why some objects is beautiful, not others?
Well, some objects appear beautiful to a particular individual, and some things, but will appear much more beautiful to others. And so it's that same thing. The reason that you can't love everything is because somehow that thing that which is not appearing beautiful, you have not recognized as beautiful because of the ego, which is determining those factors ahead of the time, you know, when you look at it. Your ego that doesn't take in everything. You know, have you ever, I remember in going to camp and having this woman scientist come up there, and she had all these dried insects that she was showing to us. And, you know, of course, us as kids were like, ew, gross. Oh, my God, look at that thing. Look at that thing. But when she talked about it, she was like, look at this. Is that not the most beautiful thing you've ever seen? And I'm like, what is she talking about? So beauty, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but beauty itself is a principle. You know, it's an idea that's part of our nature, part of what we are, but not at all times. Like when I was young, I remember sitting at the dining room table being forced to finish my peas, and I just refused that night. And I sat there refusing, and the rest of the family got up from the table, and I had to sit there until I finished my peas. Well, at that point in my life, our dining room table was actually in the laundry room, and so right there next to me was this big box of laundry detergent. So guess where my peas ended up, you know? And I say that because now peas are my favorite vegetable. I love peas. How did that happen? So yes, there are times when you won't find things beautiful, but that doesn't diminish the idea of beauty, because there are other times when those same things will appear to you as beautiful, you know, in that sense. Faith alone was capable to satisfy me in that point. Such was my beginning. And yet I must tell you that for the first 10 years, I suffered much. The apprehension that I was not devoted to God as I wished to be, my past sins always present to my mind, and the great unmerited favors which God did me, were the matter and source of my suffering. So that horrible insecurity, that terrible self-esteem, not knowing your nature to be Sat Chit Ananda, you imagine it to be a worthless soul, someone consumed by passion, someone consumed with selfishness, someone who has no devotion for God. You know, we put all of these labels on ourselves and we break ourselves down and we can't rise up above it. And for 10 years he went through that. 10 years he couldn't fully take comfort in the idea of an unlimited love, a love with no condition, a grace that had no requirement, but to be accepted. My sins, my past sins, what we've done, the memory, nobody can kick ourselves around the block better than we can. Sit there and think of all the things you've messed up on, Then there's every day we add to that. And the sad thing is once you start using that lens to look at yourself, you forget that it's just a lens. You begin really believing that stuff about yourself. And then you just sort of tape that lens to your eyes. You're no longer holding it up there. It's just there all the time because you've learned to look at yourself as broken. You've learned to see yourself as faulted. But what is the way through? He gives us a clue here. He says faith. Faith alone in the beginning. When you're told that you're beautiful, I'll have to accept that on faith, okay? We'll take our first step now as a beautiful person. When you're told that you're loving, that you're intelligent, you're like, okay. I'll take some faith, and I'll take my first step as a beautiful, intelligent, loving, unselfish person. And then you take your second. Such was my beginning, and yet I must tell you, for 10 years I suffered. It was the fact that I was not as devoted to God as I wished to be, that my past sins were always before me, and that many beautiful things that God was doing for me, I wasn't worthy of, and I was waiting for them to be taken away. During this time, I fell often. You hear that? I fell often. I forgot God often. I fell into my passions often in that first 10 years. So this idea of an instant turning, I've taken my initiation. Now I obviously won't have any dry meditations anymore. Oh, now I've moved into the monastery. My problems are behind me. Now I can be Swami Brahmananda. I can be Sri Ramakrishna instantaneously. I've given up the world. I will never have a longing for money or possessions or things again. I've given up my relationships. I'll never have a need for those things again. That idea of instant, perfect repentance, that's not born of reality. There's 10 years of suffering before that is found. And what is that suffering? That suffering is knowing your imperfection in the light of God's perfection. What is that suffering? It's knowing that you can't practice the perfect love that's being offered to you continually by the presence of God. That's suffering. That suffering is knowing that the devotion you would like to have probably will never be attained, because there can be no infinite response to the infinite love of God. The only thing that can possibly happen is your absolute surrender, your absolute laying down on the floor in front of God and just sighing out one sentence of song that will last forever. The Anahata sound coming from your own. I better not go too far into that before somebody jumps on me. But that idea, the Anahata sound, the sound of love, the sound of love, the unstruck bell, the uncaused sound, that is God's love for you. It has no cause. It's not because of anything. It is the love of God for you, period. During this time I fell often, and I rose again presently. It seemed to me that all creatures, all reason, and God himself were against me, and faith alone was for me. You know what he's saying? He's like, I thought I was the only one who thought I could do this. I was the only one. You know, nobody else believed in me. Nobody else thought that I could do this. Even God, I just felt completely alone in this endeavor. Because it seems like that in the beginning, right? When we've lost that awareness of the presence of the divine, when we've lost the idea of our inner nature, of that love, when we've never quite understood unconditioned love, it's natural. Faith alone, though, we hold on to that, right? We will not believe that God has separated from us. We will not believe that God cannot forgive us. Now, there's a corollary to that. We will not believe that I cannot forgive myself. I will not believe that I cannot love myself. Because you and God are one. We can't say things about God without saying the same thing about ourselves. So we must find that faith. And faith means believing it because you have a hunch about it, even though you can't quite demonstrate it yet. But you believe there's something here, there's something here, there's something here. I'm going to find out what it is. I'm going to touch this. All things, all creatures, all things, all reason, and God himself were against me, and faith alone was for me. I was troubled sometimes with the thoughts that to believe I had received such favors was an effect of my presumption, which pretended to be at once where others arrive with difficulty. At other times it was a willful delusion, and there was no salvation for me. What a tumultuous time. But isn't it true we feel that way sometimes? We're like, yeah, that's good for people like Brahmananda and Vivekananda and all those cool folks, the Holy Mother. But me? Well, most people don't know what I am. If people knew what I was, they wouldn't even talk to me. They wouldn't want to be around me. They wouldn't love me, you know. So faith alone is necessary to bring you through that. It's one of the reasons I'm working on a lecture series now called Everythings. And what it is in the gospel and in some of our writings, not just the gospel, but Vivekananda's writings and others, where like Mother says, faith is everything. In another place, Thakur says, mind is everything. You know, there are certain places where he says things are everything. So I'm collecting those things, these things that our sages have said were everything, and then digging into them. So here we've got this notion: faith is everything. Faith is one of the everythings that Holy Mother talks about. Faith is everything. Why? Because of this. Faith can only be matched by the reality that's behind it. And that reality will manifest because of it, right? It's that believing. It's that believing. Vivekananda, you know, he traveled here to the Parliament of Religions without knowing where it was, without having a ticket, without having, and then he lost all of his paperwork, and he just sat down on the road, not in dejection. Vivekananda, when he didn't know what to do next, he sat down and waited on the Mother. So he sat down on the curb there and waited. And what was it? He just happened to sit in front of that woman's house whose husband was running the Parliament of Religions, you know. And suddenly everything's taken care of. That's another lesson for us right there. You are an awful person. You can't ever do this by yourself. So sit down and wait for the love of God to be your encouragement. Wait for the grace of the beloved to be your motivation. Wait for God, but keep your mind firmly rooted at the feet of your beloved. And know, love is enough. And whatever dark space you find inside, go there. And in that darkness and in that pain and in that broken self-esteem, I want you to say to yourself, love will win here. And know, Hold that up with every bit of faith that you have. Go to that least favorite, most painful place of yourself. Stand there naked and alone and unprotected, but don't push against it. Just say firmly, love will win here. And go forward. When I thought of nothing but to end my days in these troubles, which did not at all diminish the trust I had in God, and which served only to increase my faith, I found myself changed all at once. Now this is interesting. I found myself changed all at once, and my soul, which till that time was in trouble, felt a profound inward peace, as if she were in her center and in her place of rest. That's the discovery of the shrine, that beautiful shrine that all of us have within, the temple of the heart, the temple of the body, where the presence of God resides. When the soul finds that place. Now it's interesting because he's just laid out 10 years of pain. And with this conversation, with this little bit of insight here, he's basically saying for 10 years I just suffered. I didn't feel like I was growing. I wasn't getting that inner peace, a little bit at a time, like, oh, it's getting there, it's getting there. Like we adjust the shower water in the morning, a little bit more cold. Oh, that's too much, a little bit less. It wasn't like that. He says that this peace came all at once. It was an act of grace. This peace that we have, this inner knowledge of God, it is not the result of work. How do we know that? From that first sentence, spiritual life is about grace. And that grace shows up when it shows up. It shows up how it shows up. And you are not in charge. It's yours to sit and wait in faith on the beloved. Brother, I share this quite a bit, but Brother St. John of the Cross would talk about that as well. He was like, all of your practices, all of your devotions, all of your prayers, they can only take you to the very edge of the precipice where God is on the other side. You cannot cross that last precipice. There's no one to take off that last sense of self, that last piece of ego. When that last piece of ego comes off your back, who is there to pick it up and throw it away? You cannot set yourself free. God alone can take that last piece of delusion that will allow you to merge, that will allow you this marriage, this consummation with the beloved. So it's not yours to marry God. It's yours to be betrothed in your own heart. And then you sit at the edge of that precipice that your practice has brought you to, and you prepare your bridal chamber. You prepare your bridal chamber. That's all you can do. God is going to come to you in the heart of your hearts and consummate this marriage with you forever. You can't make that happen before it's time. But you don't get discouraged. You fix up the bridal chamber. Keep the flowers fresh, keep the walls painted, keep the bed made, keep the windows cleaned, hang up your favorite pictures. Make sure that when the beloved shows up, wow, what a place. Flower petals all the way down the walkway and little candles on everything that sticks up and beautiful paintings of love everywhere. So this is spiritual life. Spiritual life is decorating your inner shrine, knowing that one day the beloved will come. You don't know what day that is, but every day you fix that shrine up. Why? Because you have faith. You know this to be true. It is the only thing real. I found myself changed all at once, and my soul, which till that time was in trouble, felt a profound inward peace, as if she were in her center and in her place of rest. So there you have it from the mouth of Brother Lawrence himself. There is a fulfillment to this. There is a reality to this. It might take 10 years of suffering. It might take 20. It might take 30. Who knows? But the guarantee from all the saints is, however long it is, it's worth it. Worth it without any shred of a doubt. That one moment with God is worth lifetimes of struggle. All right. I'm going to stop there. Anybody have any questions? Anybody online? No questions online?
I have a comment. So you mentioned about sitting with your dark thoughts that you have,
Uh-huh.
and say to yourself, no, I'm going to fill that with love. Something along that line. So, is there any chance of, so we read that we are Atma, we are the self, and all these things. Is there any chance of just avoiding those dark thoughts and just telling yourself, I'm the Atman, or I am that self? It's like, does that sometimes make you not sit with the dark sides of yourself and just saying, just to console yourself from a superficial level?
Well, I was with you up until you called it superficial level. How can I agree with that now? No, you have to surrender. And what that act of, surrender is an act of acceptance. You know, the sages say that this moment is perfect, right? And Sri Nisargadatta, my favorite quote by him, that the difference between the sage and the sinner, the saint and the sinner, is that the sinner is always trying to make the moment perfect, and the saint is always enjoying the moment as perfect. So that's the difference. You see, you're going to have to accept everything about yourself in the same way that the beloved does. You're going to have to embrace the miserable as well as the beautiful. We can't only take the good from this world. There's none such thing. This world is divine. The whole thing is God. And we have to go into those dark places and make our declarations that love will win here, because there does exist a perspective where God is standing, metaphorically, where everything is perfect. God sees the motive of love in everything that is happening. You know, Vivekananda tells us that love is the only motivating force in the universe. So there does exist a perspective occupied by the divine where that love in everything is witnessable, visible. And you're going to have to learn, you know, in that wonderful poem to Kali, you know, he says, who dares to hug the miserable, you know, the terrible. You know, he has Kali dancing in this crazy dance of destruction. And he says, who has the courage to embrace Mother Kali with the skulls at that point, you know, not the benevolent Kali, not the sweet mom Kali, but the destroyer Kali, you know, or Krishna's vision of God in his form with gnashing his teeth and just literally just consuming the world, gnashing them, crunching them between his teeth. That is God also. You know, God is all of the bad that's happening, seeming bad, and God is all the positive that is happening. That's why it's important for us to know who we are. If you define yourself as a body, then anything that's not comforting to the body is going to seem like evil to you. If you think yourself a mind, anything that's disturbing to the mind is going to seem evil to you. But when you know yourself as soul, evil to you. But when you know yourself as soul, when you know yourself as the sleeper, the dreamer in the bed, and not the dreamed character, then you know that the dream it just was. It's not positive, it's not negative, it was what it was. And at realization, that same thing, realization, life was what it was. You know? You don't feel the need when you wake up in the morning to figure out what the physics of your ability to fly in the dream was, right? You're not silly enough to think that you were able to fly in the dream because of a physics that was there. You just, oh, it's a dream. And that's the nature of this life. You're not going to be interested in all the intricacies of good and evil and purpose and point and all of that. When this is done, when realization is yours, it's like, nah, that was what it was. Perhaps. Yes, Ma.
So that spirituality is the grace of God.
Yes, or it begins. It's couched in grace.
Spirituality.
Yes,
Spirituality.
yes.
So how is this spirituality? I would feel spiritually I'm good. I'm a good person. I don't do bad things. I pray. I do everything. I'm a good person. Spiritually, I feel I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
You said spirituality is grace of God.
Mm-hmm.
What do you really mean spirituality? It's about a subject.
It is, yes, absolutely. Spirituality is coming to realize that your nature is spirit, that it's not body and mind, that this body is just, it's arbitrary almost, I like to point out, like when you dreamed last night, say you dreamed and in the dream you were, I don't know, a butterfly, or something. When you are presented with yourself as a butterfly in the dream, you don't have any problem with that. You accept it. Like, oh, okay. You don't even go through that. You're just a butterfly, so you just immediately start being a butterfly. And when you wake up in the morning, you don't have to like debrief yourself from being a butterfly. Like, I'm back in this again. It happens effortlessly and seamlessly, so spirituality is coming to realize and recognize that all of this is incidental, none of it is you. So that is spiritual life in its vastness. Now this sense of grace, I would say that you've been touched with grace, that you're able to have that positive, bent on yourself, that faith that I'm doing good, that I'm strong, that I'm able. That's definitely the grace of God, that keeps you going. So he touches you in that way by giving you that encouragement and that optimism. Because I know many can tell you that's not a given. Not everybody can feel that way about themselves. So that is a grace right there. The grace is the ability to grow. If there was no grace in the world, you would never learn your lesson. You would just keep doing the wrong thing over and over and over and over and over again. Some of us do anyway, but it does have a limit. And that limit is grace. When God reaches down and lifts you up, lets you see where you're stuck, lets you see your attachment. And the fact that you're able to renounce, that you're able to let go when you recognize that something's not helpful. That's grace. And that's grace. Feeling any inspiration. Inspiration is grace. Recognizing that any desire to recognize that you have an infinity to express, any effort to realize that you have an infinity of love to express, that's grace. That's grace. And all of this will bring you to that notion, that understanding of oneness, which is the final grace, when God allows you to no longer be separate, to no longer be confined in an aging body, in a tumultuous world of ups and downs. When God finally releases you from that idea of separateness, that idea of limitation, that idea of restriction, that's the final grace. Any other ideas or questions, concerns? And let's just pray that the Beloved will let us find this grace, that here, that we might experience this consolation and this peace of knowing that we're home, that Brother Lawrence shared and knew, that we might not forget that grace from our Beloved, that we might feel an infinite inspiration to touch the heart of God with our own love in response to this grace. Jai Ma, Jai Thakur, Jai Swamiji.